Hey guys, we're back and we're ready for our next presenter. I hope you had a great break. I hope you moved around a bit because we have a lot of ground to cover today. I know Robert, our next presenter, is a great proponent of physical activity. I know that you're doing strenuous marathons, stuff like that. I've only done like 10 push-ups in the past 15 minutes, so I think I'm good to go.
You're ahead of the
Um,
game then. You're ahead of the game.
Exactly. Robert, welcome back to Live Sound Summit. We've had you for the past couple of years. It's always been a great presentation on your end, and we're always happy to have you here.
Yeah, always great to come in and with you guys on this. I really enjoy what Nathan's doing here, and it's such a great balance of presentations here. I really, really enjoy what he's doing here. So, and to all of you guys, I mean, really great stuff.
Okay, so let me do my little spiel because I'm gonna be scolded by Nathan if I don't do the official presentation in the intro.
Yes.
So Robert Scoble has mixed over 3,500 events in his career, most of them in the past year for sure.
That's definitely not true.
With Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Matchbox 20, Jackson Brown, Rush, Def Leppard, and Prince. He has earned 6 TEC Awards and 3 Parnelli Awards. Robert, welcome. Your presentation this year is going to be on immersive sound, titled Why Immersive? And we are all ears if you're ready to go.
You're sure? Okay. Maybe I'll just set this up a little bit and just say that what I'm going to present to you today is really kind of a condensed version of some presentations that I did for this thing I hold called the Lab, which is kind of on hiatus right now. I'm in the process of rebuilding it, and that's kind of why I'm in my office today, my messy office, as opposed to the lab. But I covered this over 3 sessions there, so we're going to kind of condense it down into one. But this topic of immersive is really something. I'm on record as saying it, and I'll stand by it. I've never been so excited about doing something in live sound in my life as trying to get my head wrapped around this and actually get out and deploy it. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and so got a chance to dig in on it a little bit. And but I can't wait to see us get out in the world and use this. And I think what we got to do here, guys and gals, is that we have to avoid the temptation to address immersive like we seem to want to address a lot of things, a lot of new things that come into audio, and treat it kind of binary, right? Where it's either this or it's either that. Well, is this going to replace everything we're doing all right now? Of course, it is not. It is, as you'll see in this presentation today, there's lots of positives and negatives to all of these. As I've said a million times to people, audio, especially professional audio, is just managing your trade-offs. Get the best management of the trade-offs and win the game, and you'll be doing good. And you're going to see that immersive is no different. It's not an either or. We're not going to be stereo or immersive. It's going to be both. It's just another format of audio that we're going to have at our disposal out there. All right. So with that in mind, the goal here was really to kind of take some deep but high level looks at mono, stereo, LCR, and immersive, and compare them and see what their relative strengths and weaknesses were. I will add to that the additional kind of perspective on it. We're going to look at it today really strictly from the perspective of mixing live music in these formats. What does it mean to mixing live music in these formats? And add even onto that, the idea of large-scale concert sound presents some very, very interesting challenges for music with audio in these situations. I'll dig in on that a little bit as well. So just keep that in mind as we go through this, look through it through the lens of music and live performance. And let's kind of get it going here. What do you say? Is that all right, Alice? Going to start off here?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Let me see if I can get the old screen share working here. Let's see. I think it's this one. Let me know if you see the right screen here.
Yeah, we can see it. And I'm just going to do a short announcement here. If you guys want to ask Robert questions, it's like everything that we've been doing so far. Raise your hand, type them in the link that is posted in the chat. And I think, Robert, they can also unmute themselves and sort of ask questions directly to you.
Yeah, that honestly, that would be fantastic, guys. And just if you feel the urge to ask a question, please jump right in and ask it, and we'll dig down on it. I think we're going to have plenty of time here. What's my total time limit on the Prezo here? Is it 60 or 90?
Let me just double check. We have we have 90 minutes, but then we have like a 30-minute break, so we have like two.
We'll easily get through this unless we really, really tunnel down on something. We'll get through this pretty quickly. I actually cut this down pretty far to get it in the time frame. So, all right. So the question is, why immersive? And really part of the reason I named this presentation this is because that's what a lot of people were asking me at first when this first started coming up as a reality for concert sound. It was like, well, why the hell are we going to go there? Is this just some ploy to sell more speakers? I actually heard lots of people say that. It was like, no, hang on. This is not a motive. Could you sell more speakers as a result of it? Yeah, probably. But that's not the motive behind this. So that's why I came up with this. Why immersive? Okay, here's why. All right. So today, what we're going to do is we are going to put some criteria together to compare these different formats, right? So these are what we're going to judge each one of these different formats by, and we'll just rank them very loosely here, green, red, yellow, on whether they thrive or they are challenged by any one thing. So mix impulse, when I say mix impulse, what we're going to define that as, do all the elements of a mix arrive at the listener's ear at the same time? Every instrument is going to arrive at your ears at the same time: drums, bass, guitars, keys, vocal. Okay, so that's what I say when I say mix impulse. If you guys have seen my discussions on latency within consoles, mix impulse is always what I'm talking about there. We're not disjointing that mix through latency; we're keeping the impulse pure, right? So similar concept here, similar discussion here. Localization, right? How well can I correlate the audio sources with their performance positions? Does it, like, if I see the singer singing, does it sound like it's coming from where he's standing, right? That's what it comes down to. Do I hear the drums coming from where the drummer is sitting? Can I localize the audio? Mix separation. How easily can I discern different elements of the mixed or different portions of the mixed elements, i.e. the drums, bass, guitars? Can I tell them apart? Can I easily identify them within the confines of the mix? And then with regard to the speaker systems, how well can the deployment handle an extreme vertical or horizontal geometry? And sometimes it's not even extreme, right? Just to be able to handle a basic vertical and horizontal geometry. And then acoustic phase and intelligibility, always one that we want to pay a big attention to, especially in this day and age. Is the audio the listener is experiencing negatively affected by arrival times from multiple arrays? Okay, so that's one we definitely want to consider and compare. And then finally, because we're in concert sound, we're doing these shows in buildings and all kinds of other things, we have to consider the logistical considerations of a stereo array versus an immersive array versus mono even, et cetera. So we're going to compare those as well. So you'll see this as we go through it here, and just try to keep these things in mind when we're comparing. All right, so let's go to a very basic setup here. We just got our band on stage, and for the purposes of these discussions, we're going to take stage volume out of play for now. All right, don't concern yourself with stage volume right now. We're only talking about PA system deployment. Okay, so in this situation, we're going to look at mono. We're going to look at a mono PA system. So let's look at it from the perspective of mix impulse, right? Remember what mix impulse was, right? No matter where I'm at in the building, all of the instrumentation that I'm providing by the console is going to hit me at the same time. It's all going to arrive at the same time. Let's kind of take out of the concept of frequency arrival times, et cetera. In its broadest sense, all of those instrumentations are going to leave that single speaker system and arrive at my ear at the same time, regardless of where I'm at in the building, right? So mix impulse gets a green light here. It's good, really good for mono. That can work really good. How about coverage capabilities? Okay, well, the coverage capabilities for a mono concert system are actually very challenging, right? We're going to be in one of two worlds there if we need to cover anything past the 180 line. Heaven help us if we've got to cover 270 With a mono array, we're going to be really challenged to do that. We're going to have a huge golf ball hanging right in the middle of the arena or the stage, right above the stage to cover that kind of horizontal geometry, or we're going to do distributed mono, which has all kinds of challenges with that as well. So coverage capabilities are pretty challenging with mono. If you've got a pretty narrow space, you can get away with it. But in traditional concert sound, if we've got to go wide, we got challenges there. How about localization? So localization can be okay, kind of depending where you are, right? If I see the singer and the drummer and the bass player kind of standing in the center of the stage, and the PA is hung dead center, going to be fairly localized there. But if I've got people out on the wings, that's going to be a challenge. I'm going to look one way and hear it coming from another direction, right? They're going to kind of be decorrelated there in terms of their localization. It won't necessarily sound like the keyboards are coming from the left side of the stage. Everything is coming from the center of the stage, right? So localization, not so great there. Okay for some instruments, not okay for others. How about mix separation? Well, mix separation is actually pretty tough in mono. And, again, I'm not here to say mono's great or mono's bad, stereo good, mono bad, any of that kind of thing. You just have to take it in context, right? And I think, like even if you go back, I was just thinking of this, even if you go back in time and look at mono recordings, anything up through the, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, if you really look at it from a musical perspective, the vast majority of music that was recorded and subsequently mixed in mono was pretty simple arrangements, right? I mean, they were pretty simple. And the more complex the arrangement gets, the tougher the mix gets to be in mono. I mean, it's very difficult to get separation of instrumentation and be able to hear every element of it clearly, the more complex the arrangement gets. So, mix separation in mono is tough. It's challenging. You got to keep it in perspective there. How about acoustic phase and intelligibility? Well, we're dealing with one speaker source, right? So the acoustic phase of the source itself is going to be very good regardless of where we are, right? We're not going to have interfering speaker systems. We're not going to have, unless we're in distributed mono, right, which we are not here, you're not going to have competing sources to your ear. So the acoustic phase and intelligibility of mono is actually really good, right? So you kind of get the idea of what we're doing here. We're going to do this for mono, stereo, LCR, and finally immersive, right? We're going to compare these things and see how they come out. How about logistical considerations? Well, mono can be easy, but it can get complex very quickly. If we've got an extreme vertical geometry, we're going to have a huge banana, a big long line banana hanging right in the middle of our production. If we need to do distributed mono, like I said, that gets challenging as well. So, logistical considerations, believe it or not, are actually kind of tough for mono in a concert sound setting, right? Okay, so let's just kind of check the scorecard here a little bit. So, mono gets some greens, certainly in terms of mix impulse, acoustic phase and intelligibility, it does very well there, but is challenged for mix separation, coverage capabilities, logistical considerations, et cetera, right? So is this making sense to you guys, how we're going to do this? Is that feel like going to be some useful information to you? Okay, good. All right, let's carry on, as they say. Let's take a look at stereo, right? All right, so stereo, how about mix impulse? Well, we actually have a pretty green light for mix impulse as well, again, because all of the instrumentation is going to be leaving the speaker systems at the same time and at the same location, right? So mix impulse is actually really good for stereo. How about coverage capabilities? Well, certainly coverage capabilities, we've done really well with stereo. We know how to cover a room. We can get audio to all points of the room pretty easily in stereo, right? We can wrap it around. We can cover 260. We can go 360 if we want to do it with kind of distributed stereo in this situation. But even here, we can, in today's world, we can have a single array that can cover 270 degrees here on either side, or the back side of the 270, right? So without distributing it. How about localization? Well, localization actually gets a yellow here, in my opinion, because if we're standing here looking at the lead singer, well, we get it kind of from two different locations, right? So it can mess with it a little bit. but it's actually overall pretty good, right? I mean, if we have things panned, we might be okay there. But the thing to really remember with stereo, and this is where it's going to become challenged for large scale concert sound, is that remember things that are in the center, right? Things that are panned center are the function of the addition of two speakers, right? So if we have something localized in the center, it relies entirely on the ability of those two speakers to add together properly there. As we move off to the left, not only does localization get messed with a little bit, but also frequency response, right? And that we're going to see some comb filtering start to come into play there. So keep in mind, and this is, for my money, not to give away the punchline ahead of time, but this is the big challenge for concert sound, large scale concert sound in stereo. This is why I honestly, I don't think stereo is the greatest option in large scale concert sound at all. How about mix separation? Well, mix separation is pretty easy in stereo. In fact, we get some improvement in mix separation in stereo compared to mono, do we not? Right, where we can get kind of things out left and right. But in large scale concert sound, we can, while we get this separation, remember that the panning knob is amplitude based, right? It is not time based. So, how about acoustic phase and intelligibility? This is one where stereo, this is what I was leading to, where stereo can kind of mess with us a little bit in large scale concert sound. And it's not that it doesn't mess with you in small scale sound, like I'm sitting in front of a pair of stereo speakers here, but the offset at any one position is only a couple of inches, right? It's only a matter of inches. So any comb filtering that I'm going to hear by things that are pan center, meaning they're coming out of both speakers, is going to be very high up in the frequency range, right? It's not going to comb filter very deep. Well, in large scale concert sound, that's not the case, right? As we move off center, let's think about things that are in the center of a stereo image, typical stereo image in a music production, right? Drums, bass, vocal, right? That represents nearly the entire frequency range of the PA. So as we move left or right here, we're going to get to a point where we're going to hear a maximum amount of comb filtering. And not only are those things going to drop down a little bit in amplitude, but in frequency response, well, their frequency response is going to be degraded because of the offset in time that those two things are going to be added together, right? So, I've had a lot of arguments with people about this actually happening because there are speaker manufacturers that claim their PA system doesn't do this, and they have the widest center image and all these sorts of things. It's like, guys, you can't really defy the laws of physics here. You either have two different arrival times or you don't. And I think if you're paying attention to it and you're really listening, you can hear this. You can absolutely hear this. And the problem with it is it goes all the way down into low frequency here, right? Because the offset, let's just take the simple math here. If these two arrays were 100 feet apart, right, which is not uncommon in some concert sound settings, think about how far that comb filter would go down if you're hearing both of those arrays in that location, right? It would be nearly full range. It would affect the bass guitar, bass drum, everything in that range, right? So, and again, I don't want to necessarily come across as oh God, Scoville crushed stereo. He hates it, et cetera. No, this is just one of the trade-offs. You deal with this in stereo, right? Maybe you minimize the overlap in your PA, kind of things like this. But to say this doesn't happen is, simply not true. This does happen. It's just a matter of degrees. How about local or logistical considerations? Well, I'll go yellow here because, we've done stereo for a long time now. We can handle it pretty well. We've done it for a lot of situations here. But here's why I give it a yellow now. And again, we got to keep it in the context of concert production, right? Think about what gets the money today in concert production. Video, right? Video is everywhere. Stage production look is everything. That's where all the money goes. And in stereo today, especially with long line sources, et cetera, we can disrupt the look of the show. Without a doubt, we can disrupt the look of the show. We can, if I have another church complain to me about their bananas hanging down in their video screens, it's just part of the deal, right? It's how it works right now because we're in a vertically arrayed topology in speaker systems right now, not horizontally arrayed, right? So I give it a yellow there. All right. So this is kind of how the scorecard comes out for stereo. Mix impulse and coverage capabilities are its strong suits. I think acoustic phase and intelligibility, even though it can be pretty good, don't get me wrong, that one area, those one areas where those two, the left and right overlap specifically for the center panned instruments, that's a problem. That's a problem. And and it really shows itself in large scale concert sound. It wouldn't show itself in my room here because the cancellation doesn't go low enough in frequency. But out in the big world, as you start to get arrays farther apart, it's an issue. It is definitely an issue. All right, let's take a look at LCR deployments. And for LCR, for this conversation, we're going to keep LCR at 100% divergent. And I'm praying that you guys all understand what divergence means in LCR. I'll give you just the brief flyby of it. 100% divergent means that if we have something pan center, it's only coming out of the C bus, right? Things that you listen to, like movies that you listen to, television, all of those things are 100% divergent. That's why dialogue only comes out of the center channel, and all the music and effects and everything else come out of the left-right channels in your 5.1, right? So that is 100% divergent, meaning if they have that vocal pan center, it's only going to come out of your center speaker. Well, in this situation, if we're doing 100% divergent concert sound, these are the ramifications there, right? So let's talk mix impulse. Okay, mix impulse is actually pretty good here, with the exception of we can start to get some disjointing of the instrumentation through propagation offsets here, right? If we have keyboards panned left, we have guitar panned hard right, but we have all the drums and bass and vocals in the center. Remember, they're coming out there discretely. So time offset will actually, propagation offset, I should say, will actually disjoin this mix just a little bit. The drums, guitar, and vocal are going to arrive at the listener's ear at one time, and the guitar and keyboards are going to arrive at the listener's ear at a little different time. It's going to be a little bit later, right? We're going to disjoin that mix through propagation a little bit here. But I have some theories on that I'm going to share with you about that. So here we get just a little bit of different offsets, right? As we move around the room, over here, keyboards are going to be arriving earlier than the guitar that is over on the other side of the stage, right? Now, keep in mind, we don't have to pan things out this dramatically if we don't want to do it. But if you were going to do this and reinforce localization, this would be an issue. How about coverage capabilities? Well, if we're going to do 100% divergent, meaning discrete LCR here, then each of these arrays has to cover a huge swath of the geometry, right? If vocals, kick, snare, bass are the only thing coming out of, or only coming out of the C array, I should say, then that's got to cover the entire geometry, right? It's got to cover a wide swath of the LCR. What happens when we get all the way off onto the left side? Well, even though the coverage is good there, the time offset is there. There's no doubt about it. It's going to, the left array information is going to arrive to the listener earlier than the C and the far right. And this is kind of a microcosm of what we're going to see in immersive. This is happening in immersive as well, where we get a little bit of disjointment from through propagation, right? But it's, I got some theories on that I'm going to share with you once we get to immersive. And they are theories, trust me. But coverage capabilities are okay, but they put some demands on it here. We have trouble here extending horizontal coverage of LCR. How about localization? Okay, well, a localization actually jumps to green here in LCR because as we look center, remember those instrumentations are only coming out of the center. As we look left, well, the guy on the left is primarily coming out of the left portion of the PA. The guy on the right is primarily coming out of the right portion of the PA, right? So, localization is actually a green in LCR. You get great separation via localization here. Same for mix separation, right? Those two things kind of go hand in hand here, where we have no problem actually hearing the instrumentation. Where we might get into a little problem is if the time offset is big enough to cause problems. The propagation offset, I should say. Acoustic intelligibility, acoustic phase and intelligibility is actually really good for discrete LCR. And again, we have to kind of compare this to stereo, right? Where in stereo, that center image is created by the addition of the outside speakers, the left and right. In LCR, that center image is created by one speaker source. So the acoustic phase of it is going to be great. There are no competing speaker systems to kind of dig into the frequency response of that center position, right? And likewise, as we go off to the right, we only hear the right elements out of that right system. There's no summation of speaker systems to create that image there. Okay. Logistical considerations. This is actually pretty tough. Trust me, as a guy who did LCR for 20 plus years, it's a challenge. It was a challenge even then to get a proper length of line in the center, to get it properly placed, to get it at the right height compared to the left, right, all kinds of things. And there were a lot of compromises for me to actually even do it as much as I did it. I never did it 100% divergent. We were always 50% divergent, which I'll explain as we go forward here. But the logistical considerations are real here. Not only do you have the issue of blocking sight lines, but also getting this thing up out of the middle of the production. It can look really bad if you're not careful here. You have to have a very nimble vertical coverage capability on that C array to be able to do this properly. Okay, so the final scorecard there is, again, just kind of trade-offs, right? Some of them are good at some things, some of them are not so good. The strengths of LCR are localization, mixed separation, and acoustic phase and intelligibility because of that lack of array additions to create image, right? I'll pause for a second to take a drink and say, any questions, anything you want to get down in the dirt and wrestle about this?
Nothing in the chat so far. So if you guys have any questions, you can just unmute yourselves and ask.
Hey, Robert.
Yeah.
Hey, my name's Anthony. I mix for Cirque du Soleil, and we use a lot of space map in a kind of a 5.1 configuration. And I've been doing a lot of research about your manual delay compensation, and I'm quite caught up. How does this affect your localization when you employ your manual delay compensation? Does your buffer get smaller, require a less buffer to help with the imaging of the system, or is it all still hitting the master bus at the same moment? You're not breaking anything out, or are you running your vocal to the center through a matrix and then putting that into the LCR, or are you just going out stereo and then using LCR to?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you, I break those things into two very different piles, right? Deal with console latency on its own.
Yep.
And then deal with spatialization external to that, right? And you want to do it for a number of reasons, which we'll address again a little later in this presentation. But you want to have your latency sorted out and managed in your console, if for no other reason than if you have to do any kind of fold downs, it's coherent, right? The mix impulse is pure there, right? When you start cross-pollinating those things of latency and propagation to get imaging right, et cetera, man, it becomes an absolute mess for
I'm more
for your fold down.
Talking to, no, I completely understand the propagation and latency argument. I'm just saying, does that expose it more if it's broken up into LCR? Does it doesn't stereo, or does it to you it sounds the same? It doesn't have any adverse effect if you're going from a stereo, like manual compensation alone. Going from stereo to LCR doesn't have an effect on any kind of timing issues because of the system the way it is.
Well, timing of the system, no, not really. But for music preparation, for sure, I would still pay very close attention. Well, actually, I'll back up on what I was going to say there. If we're in 100% divergent, I would pay. You have the luxury of being able to pay less attention to interaction between the C and the LR, because they have discrete signals anyway, right? You're rarely ever going to have the same signal in all three arrays there, right? Because anything I have pan center is only coming out of the C bus, and then it's just a matter of amplitude shift left or right. So I'm not as concerned about alignment there. If I'm 50% divergent, I'm desperately aware of it and need it. Let me see. Sorry, I got myself off track there. In terms of alignment of PA system, then yeah, I'm still concerned about that in 50%, but not as much in 100%. I would probably still take care of it because ultimately arrival time matters, right? But you're gonna kind of drag me into a piece of this that I'm going to discuss a little bit later, but I'll jump into a little bit of it now. I think if we were in a situation where we were purely listening Like, let's say we had something up in LCR, we had the C bus, the LR, and we were all the way off to one side, and we heard the late arrival of that C and R on the left side. You follow me there? I think if we were purely listening to it, we might have an issue with it. You might just kind of go, oh, that sounds kind of odd. But given that we are watching something and listening to it, I think this is my theory. I think our mind fixes that a little bit. I think our mind kind of goes, oh, that's okay. Yeah, I see the guy there. He looks closer to me. He actually sounds a little louder. The guy over there is farther away, but I hear him coming from over there. And the guy in the center, yeah, I kind of see him coming from the center. And even though he's a little late, I don't really realize it. I'm just watching the guy sing and hearing him do it. Now, I think there's a limit to this. And I don't know what that limit is yet. I really want to get out into the world and explore it. I mean, I think immersive in a football stadium might reveal it. But I think, at the hockey arena level, or even, certainly at a theater level, I think you're going to get away with it. I think your brain is going to say, it's going to trade it off and say, okay, I'll forgive that because the localization, and I can pull that instrument out and see and hear what he's doing so easily, is happening right before my eyes. That's my theory. That's Scoville's theory here.
Love it, man. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else before we move on there? I mean, it's a juicy topic. You're going to find yourself thinking pretty deeply about this once you really, really start digging in. So
maybe one question on this. So when you add in subs, which are also can be left, right, or mono, how does this change basically the analysis that you did here?
I'm going to ask you to hold on that 1 second, because it's the next segment that's coming up here.
All right.
We're going to talk about fill systems and subwoofers. So no, it's totally legitimate question for sure. All right. Let's move to immersive now. Let's just see what, and maybe this is the time to kind of get up on the soapbox a little bit as well and say this. I've been saying this for a little bit of time now, that immersive is going to be the most misused term we got going in audio, and certainly in live sound it's going to be the case, because I think as soon as we hear the word immersive, I think people have a tendency to immediately jump to surround sound, right? It's going to be 360 degrees of sound, which is legitimate. I mean, if you hear the word immersive, that's what you would think. But I think certainly in the earliest days of doing this for concert sound, and remember, we're talking about mixing music, live music for concert sound here, I don't think it's going to be surround. I think it's going to be what I've taken the liberty of labeling it front field immersive, right? Which is really just discrete placement of objects in a front field here, right? I mean, you can make this as wide as you want to make it, but in the initial days of this is what it's going to be, right? We're going to have a front field that is going to have some immersive qualities to it. Okay, so I've just put up a simple, 5 evenly spaced arrays here. We won't go into all the concepts that are being developed right now of creating these wider versus narrower versus center focused versus wider focused arrays. That's for another day. But just to get the point across, we're just going to do a simple front field immersive 5 wide. Okay. So in this situation, how about mix impulse, right? Well, again, similar to LCR, this is where mix impulse can kind of get put, disjointed a little bit through propagation. Now, it's important to say, and I'm sorry, I forgot who asked me the question just recently on the latency. This is a good example of where you have to pay attention to latency interconsole for specific groups of instruments, right? Like, I don't want to have any latency offsets at the input stage of my drum kit, because the drum kit is going to come through one speaker system and it's going to reveal those latency offsets, right? But if I have a different throughput on the guitar in this situation versus the drums and the bass, well, that latency offset is not going to matter as much because I'm already going to have offset via propagation there. Airspace is going to take care of some of that for us. It's just going to either exaggerate it or not, right? Where we don't have guitar and drums coming through the same speaker system. If we had them coming through the same speaker system, then the latency path through the console would matter dramatically for that, right? That's my take on it anyway. I believe that matters very, very much. But in this situation, it doesn't. kind of going back to the fold down situation though, and we cannot deny that there is a fold down in place here, which we're going to talk about in this next segment here, then the latency becomes an issue again, right? Especially if we're going to do fill systems, maybe around the corner or front fill, especially if we're going to do a flattened mono front fill, then that latency becomes an issue again, because now all instrumentation is exiting the same speaker, right? So I encourage you to really dig your brains into this and really start to parse out the difference between latency and propagation, because they mean two very, very different things. Do not conflate those two things. And it's going to get revealed in this world, because they are definitely two different things in the immersive world, right? So mix and pulse gets a little disjointed with immersive, but as I say, I think that's going to be okay. I think our brain actually heals that a little bit if we're standing in the audience watching this go down. If we're just listening, probably not impressed by it. I mean, really, where you just kind of go, oh, that doesn't quite sound right. But if you add this in with the visual, all of a sudden it makes sense. I'll give you a real world example of where this happens, and tell me how many of you guys have experienced this in virtual sound check, where you mix completely in virtual sound check, lights up, empty arena, and think, yeah, it sounds okay. I got that sounding pretty good. And then when the lights go down and the stage lights come on and the performers walk on stage and start playing, you think, oh man, that sounds so much better than it did this afternoon. I think that's part of that mentality in play. It's the same mix. You haven't changed anything, right? It's just the environment has changed and the stimulation has changed, of what you're watching and listening. So that's Robert's theory. I have no way of proving it other than just practical experience. All right, so mix and pulse can get a little disjointed in immersive, but I actually think that's okay. Right? See where we get different arrival times from these guys? Yeah. How about coverage capabilities? Well, coverage capability in immersive is really a challenge, I think, to get it to do really, really right. And, we're going to talk about this in the summation here, but, I think this is one of the challenges going forward for immersive. And one of the questions that's going to be put to the manufacturers is it going to change the agenda for speaker design going forward? If we're doing immersive, really what we want is very, very wide coverage of a single array, not narrow coverage, wide coverage, right? Because a single array is going to be tasked with covering a very wide swath of the geometry, right? The wider, the better, really, to some degree here. And then, of course, we have the additional challenge of here, okay, well, if we're spatialized in the front field of this, what happens around the corner of the stage? How do we cover back there and have it mean anything? Or how do the people that are sitting down below the arrays, how do we cover that and have it meaningful, right? How about delays? Are we going to put up delays? Is that going to be spatialized? How do we extend coverage there? So a lot of things to consider in terms of coverage, and they're very challenging for immersive. How about localization?
Robert? Yeah. Real quick, just to clarify something for me. When you say this front field immersive, when we talk about coverage, does that then mean that each instrument is then coming out of its own cluster?
It can. It has the ability to do that. I think one of the things I've seen so far in immersive is that people have a tendency to, and I think it's because of the acoustic phase, tendency to try and not put instrumentation in between arrays, because you can move it anywhere in this field because of that that comb filtering aspect of it. Now you have two arrays responsible for one source. And, immersive is trying to erase that a little bit and say you could do that. So in answer to your question, you could certainly do it that way if you wanted to do it. But usually what I've seen more often than anything is people will localize with front field immersive, meaning things that are in the center typically come out of the center array. And in typical music presentations, that's kick, or that's drums, bass, vocals, some of those center elements. And, it kind of also speaks to, which we won't go into today, why the size of the arrays matters. You might end up with your biggest, most powerful array being the center array. It's going to carry the most, power engaged elements of your mix, right? So again, I'm going to have the most powerful elements coming out of the center. Well, I've got to have a coverage pattern in that center that gets it out to the sides as well, right? So it is a challenge in the current offerings of PA systems out there. Although I will tell you, And I know this is going to sound fluffy. I fully realize it's going to sound fluffy. But, the first time I ever kind of looked at immersive, I just thought, wow, how is that going to work? I mean, how are you going to hear these center elements off to the sides, et cetera, But every time I've gone to hear it now, I just think, how is that working so good? Why is that working so good? How am I hearing those elements off to the sides so well? And, the place where it can really, really shine, I'll say there's two places where I've seen this and had it really, really shine. Let me get through this little piece of the scorecard here, and then I'll explain what I'm talking about there. And because this is going to help support what I'm going to say. So let's talk localization in immersive. Well, yeah, localization is incredible in immersive. It's really its strongest suit. No matter where I look, that's where I hear the audio, right? I hear it coming from that localization. And our mind, I think our brain really, really likes that. Mixed separation, also dead simple here. If you have that kind of localization capability, mixed separation is going to be easy as well. You're going to be able to separate instrumentation and make them very, I guess, legible or intelligible for huge parts of the audience. Acoustic phase and intelligibility, similar concept here where any one instrument can be coming out of any one array, right? So there's no competing arrays creating image. Even the center image here, you don't have competing arrays creating that center image. It's only coming from one array. So the acoustic phase and the intelligibility in the system are really, really its strengths. And I think, again, just my theory, I think that's why we accept it so readily when we hear it, because everything is intelligible. All of a sudden, like our emphasis on, even if we're aware of it or unaware of it, of time slips a little bit. We are willing to let some of that go because we can hear the instrumentation so well. So I'll give you two examples of shows that I've heard where it kind of blew me away, where I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is the answer here. If anybody's ever mixed two drummers in a single band, you know how difficult that is to do. It is so challenging. I won't say impossible because a lot of people have done it for the years, but it is really, really challenging. I got invited down to see Bon Iver at Santa Barbara Bowl, and they have two drummers in that band, or he did at the time. And one is stage right, one is stage left. And they placed them that way in the immersive, meaning one drummer was coming out of the stage left half of the system, one drummer was coming out of the stage right. And it took my breath away how good that was. I could hear every single nuance of what either drummer was doing, no matter where I was in that space. I mean, and down to, if somebody was playing brushes or somebody was doing something really cool grace note wise, you knew immediately which drummer it was because of their localization, right? So it worked incredible for that. And I think a similar thing can happen for vocalists here, right? Where I think rap is the best example here, where you might have, where if you had somebody on a tracker, which we'll talk about toward the end of the presentation here, you had a vocalist on a tracker so that no matter where he went on stage, he would be coming out of the arrays that are definitely in front of him. And if you had two guys rapping, three guys rapping, four guys rapping, it would be very, very easy to tell who is saying what, because you're going to localize it, right? You're going to say, hey, the guy on stage left is only coming out over there on stage left. I know what he's singing and what he's doing, right? So having that kind of abilities in this kind of arrangement is really, really, really key. It's just an amazing confluence of technology here. It's really cool. Now, what has to go with that is the object-oriented part of the mixing, which we're going to discuss right at the end of this, okay? Logistical considerations, as you can imagine, this is very difficult to sell right now to productions. You're going to hang 5 arrays in front now? That's what you're going to do now? You're kidding, right? So, but here's the deal, what we can get away with in immersive in terms of height is very different than what we can typically get away with in stereo, right? And what I've been trying to promote to productions that I'm trying to get them to do this is, let's make a trade. Okay, let's make a trade. You give me the high horizontal space, truss height, if you want to do it, 40 feet off the ground. Give me that space above, and I'll give you everything below it. You will not see a single speaker below that height, right? And I'm surprised how many people have kind of gone for it. They kind of go, okay, now hang on a minute. So we won't see anything in the horizontal view, speaker-wise. No, you won't. And all of a sudden that becomes a little more palatable. Then they can design around that a little bit. So it's going to be a hard sell over time. There are going to be places which we're going to talk about here, especially for touring, where you can't put it up. I mean, just logistically can't put it up in some venues. So that's a whole nother challenge that comes with this in terms of how do we manage going back and forth between immersive and stereo and mono, whatever it's going to be. But just for the purposes of this demonstration, right? This is how the scorecard kind of shakes out for me anyway with immersive. So great localization, great mix separation, great acoustic phase and intelligibility. Man, if I can get those three for concert sound, I'm feeling pretty good about it. I might sacrifice a little bit of mix impulse through propagation disjointment, as long as it's not too extreme. Yeah, I'll take that. If I can get my coverage sorted out as well, I really feel like I'm going to be winning with immersive here, right? Because I personally think that people, the audience listener, again, this is going to be another of Scoville's theorems here. I think the listeners are way, way, way more sensitive to frequency response than they are time offsets. I mean, look, I've known some great recording engineers that wouldn't recognize a time offset if their life depended on it. But they understand frequency. Well, I think a lot of the listeners are the same way. If something doesn't sound right frequency wise, that will catch their attention way more than it arriving, X amount of milliseconds late from another speaker source. So just my theory there. All right, so let's just take a quick comparison of all of these now. So as I mentioned at the top of the thing here, it's all about managing trade-offs, right? All about managing trade-offs. So you can see that LCR and immersive actually are kind of similar in terms of their greens, but a little different in terms of their coverage capabilities. But I think that's going to iron itself out over time, right? And as you'll see here, once we start talking about object, in terms of the console, you can start combining all of these methodologies into one thing, right? But that's the kind of the look at speaker formats there. Want to take a pause, take a breath for a second, and just absorb that and see if you got any questions. Anthony, it was you that was asking about the latency. Thanks, man. Sorry, I didn't mean to blank you there.
Yeah, thanks for answering. And I actually had a follow up, and this is not really pertaining to immersive, but I had a question, and you might have said pointed this out in one of the later videos of the lab series, but after your pre-aligned template is measured and in place, do you not keep the bridge channels on the surface to free up more inputs available for your 1 through 64? Or do you keep the bridge channels hidden on like a lower layer? But that's like once your pre-aligned template's done, do you get rid of the bridge channels?
I do.
Okay.
I do, because it's going to be post fader of your main channel, et cetera.
Right.
Now, the thing you just need to take care of, we're going to go into another presentation here, is, I will put that bridge channel down because I won't need to see it. But what I have done in the past with great effect is, if I've got especially for vocals, if I've got that bridge aligned to another channel, then I'll do my inserts on the bridge channel. So I need those two things to be aligned, right? As opposed to trying to, do that insert and then send it both places. So you just got to be a little careful with it. Just check it. I mean, not for nothing, I've gone through all that time, 4 or 5 years of talking about manual delay compensation, and now we got ADC in venue now. So I don't have to manually compensate on venue now. It's done automatically. So it's really, it's liberating, let me tell you, to not have to worry about it.
Yeah, thank you again for doing that whole lab series. It's been the sabbatical of my pandemic, so I really appreciate you going as deep as you did and as long as you did on those videos.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you so much. I'm going to be back here soon. We're in the process of rebuilding the lab right now. I'll be back on the soldering iron and the Cat 5 cables here as soon as I leave this. And
yeah,
going to be a lot of good stuff coming. So hang in there. Thank you, Dad.
I'm a huge proponent of your workflow and your complete front of house engineer. I mean, if that's not the perfect title for what the lab could be called, it really is. So just thanks again.
Thank you, man. That's very, very kind. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, let's carry on here. So let's just talk about managing the trade-offs here. So here's some of the let me just try to say that again. Immersive pluses and minuses. So as I mentioned, kind of the immersive offers the trade-off of improved intelligibility and localization against a slightly compromised mix impulse, right, through the propagation offsets in the space. So that in the terms of concert sound, that feels like a good trade to me. If I was mixing purely for music in an immersive setting, even if I was doing Dolby Atmos mixes for music, I would pay much more attention to that, where it's going to be listen only. Let's see here. There we go. Mix impulse is not compromised in the down mix of the console signals, right? That is something to consider here. If you're going to have this disjointment that happens at propagation, you don't have to worry about it in terms of the down mix. It's not going to mess with it there, but only, as I was mentioning to Anthony, only if your channel latency between the objects is properly managed. And there's actually another reason to have that latency managed properly that we're going to see here as we start to talk about what a spatialized mono fill is going to do to your signal. Okay, so that's the other reason. I'll kind of tip my hand here a little bit. That's the other reason that latency needs to be dealt with at the console level, even in immersive here. As I mentioned, part of the pitch that we have to make for immersive is trading low vertical space for high horizontal space. That's what we want to trade to get that space up there. This is, as I say earlier, video gets all the money right now. So we have to pay attention to that and let them have their game, right? The primary challenge, coverage challenge for immersive, vertical measured against the possible length of the line, right? So here's the challenge. Here's the big coverage challenge, or big deployment challenge for immersive, is that you've still got to cover the entire vertical geometry. And if your trim height has to start very high, you may get limited in the amount of vertical that you can put up, right? So that, the actual possible rigging height might get challenged by it, especially even in large basketball arenas. You might get challenged by this, right? We're not going to be able to hang lines probably as long as we have in the past, but there is also an efficiency that comes with immersive as well, right? Where we don't have every input of the console exiting every speaker at the same time. There is an efficiency that comes with that helps offset that need for the additional line. Now, does the pattern control and the frequency control of that line all still matter? Of course it does. It absolutely does. But again, we got to trade that off a little bit and can do that very, very elegantly and immersive. Wraparound coverage in hockey and basketball style arenas, where we're creating really non-immersive zones, they can be potentially challenging, and they can actually challenge some of the front field localization if they're not handled right in terms of amplitude, which we'll see here coming up. All right. How about let's take a pause for a second and maybe talk about some future development for immersive speakers, because we're, in terms of doing immersive speaker deployment for concert sound, we're still very, very young in this, right? We've got a long way to go here in terms of really handling this. And I kind of alluded to it earlier, wondering whether it's going to actually change the agenda for a lot of speaker manufacturers now in terms of their array designs, right? What they're going to do. Will it drive a different type of speaker array deployment now? Going to need something that's more vertically nimble. As I just mentioned, we're going to have to be able to cover, large swaths of vertical from a very high trim height. We definitely need wider overall horizontal coverage. I mean, we need something that is much, much wider Q. If we want to do immersive surround, are we going to get to a speaker systems that are battery powered? I mean, we live in the era of Elon Musk. Why can't we have this? Battery powered speaker systems that are only on when they see signal, RF driven, where we could literally just put them on a chain motor, fly them up in the air, turn them on, and they're ready to go. Pair to them, whatever you want to do. I don't think we'll be using Bluetooth, but there we go. Who knows? But get RF driven systems that are battery powered there, and you could put up a lot of speakers very quickly in that situation with not a lot of fuss and muss, no cable trusses, none of that kind of stuff. So will we get to that point? if immersive takes off and grabs a good foothold, we probably will. How do you manage the challenge of moving from immersive to stereo depending on venue logistic hurdles, right? Primarily, trim height is going to be one of your main ones. Do we sacrifice seating beyond the 180-degree line? Anytime you hear the words, do we sacrifice seating, don't ever count on that happening. It's never going to happen. So we're going to have to come up with a solution for it. All right. So let's move into immersive fills and subwoofer concepts here, right? Because this is a whole nother world. And in the lab series, if you want to see the really, really in-depth discussion of this, go check out the lab videos for this. I'm only going to talk about immersive here just to save some time. But normally I would compare all of the different topologies or all the different formats here, but we're going to stick to only immersive for this discussion today. All right, so how do we fill this, right? We've got this front field. How do we actually take on the fill of this? Sorry, give me 1 second here. There we go. How do we actually fill this? Because obviously this is only going to work for a portion of the audience, right? Only a portion of the audience is going to be in the immersive zone. So how do we do it? Well, we have the ability with these spatializers to, believe it or not, actually do spatialized mono. And this is something that was brought to my attention by Scott Sugden at L Acoustics. He's been the one that really turned me on to this. And he's even become more aware of it and used it more recently, where in the past, they've done, for some of these fill situations, they've done what we term flattened mono, which is every input just in mono coming out of these fill sources, right? And you can imagine what that does to the localization and the spatialization. It's just going to narrow it down. You're just going to hear it like a mono mix if you're standing in the near field of any of these systems. But with the concept of spatialized mono, inside the spatializer, they actually do the math, a delay matrix to math of that mono. So in these offstage positions, it's taking into account the spatial arrangement of those instruments in the front field and keeping them time coherent there. So you actually hear the time offset in that spatialized mono aligned back to the front field immersive, right? And I'll tell you something, I have heard this. I was very, I'll use the word wary, doubtful of how good this would be. I was blown away at how good this was. I mean, it just kept the imaging correct. I remember standing on the side, listening to this and just kind of thinking, why is my attention pulled directly to the center of the stage right now for the vocalist? Even though I'm standing right in front of a mono fill here, it still sounded like the vocal was coming from the center of the stage. It was so impressive. So spatialized mono, there you go. Here we go. So that's what he's been using for the side fill arrangements to extend coverage around, and also been doing that for the ground fill. Like if he has ground fill down, remember we got a PA system that's actually flown very high now. So you need something to pull imaging down for these people that are close to the stage and close to the PA system. Well, spatialization in terms of mono actually does that very well. You create some zones, believe it or not, of spatialization there. So how do we go about doing delay systems in this situation? Well, we could certainly keep the spatialization, just extend the spatialization if we want to do it with fill speakers, or we could just go to flattened mono out there as well and just try to get more diction. We would probably cross this over. We wouldn't necessarily run this full range out there. We just try to get some diction extension on the system itself out there, right? In terms of the spatialization, you're sacrificing that in the far field here when you go to that situation. Here, you could actually extend the spatialized zone out farther from the stage. Okay. So immersive fill systems actually require are required to be more powerful than a typical mono system because it's taking into account all the power elements, and compared to the immersive, has to send them all out one speaker system. So it actually has to be a pretty good sized system over there to be able to pull this off. Far field spatialization is just dependent upon the geometry, the distance of the listening field. And, as we're going to see in the summation here, this is very situational what you're going to do here. You're going to have to be really nimble if you're out doing this. let's talk subwoofers for a second. And this gets really interesting here. So remember that center array for most situations, where you're going to do music, right? We're going to keep it in the context of music, where you might have drums, bass, vocal center. That's got to be the big, powerful array. And typically that's where the subwoofer is going to emanate from. You're going to fly that in the center and have it support that array. As far as ground fill coverage, probably going to cross it over a little differently, going to be at a different, different pass band on the ground compared to the flown, and, space it out at quarter wave, whatever you're going to do, try to get some really good even coverage down there. But the idea, again, is to pull attention down, right? Heil says inside of 40 feet, we still can localize low frequency information. So get something on the ground and pull people's attention down. That's what I've been doing for years, even though I wasn't using subwoofer information in the flown PA. I was still using subwoofer on the floor to pull low frequency imaging down for the listeners there. Okay, so they can really benefit greatly from the immersive format, where you get a level of efficiency here that is pretty dang impressive. Even comparing this to the Bon Iver show, where it had drummers left and right, I believe, I'm almost positive that they had the subwoofer system flown center there. Now, would I take two subwoofer systems and push them out left and right? Honestly, I probably wouldn't, because then I'm creating an offset zone in the horizontal. I would much rather have a centrally located subwoofer in that situation for sure, because the alignment of that C array to that subwoofer through crossover is going to be really, really good for a huge swath of the room, whereas outside of that, it's not. But we're typically not going to put the bass guitar stage left and the drums center, things like that. There are some practical, pragmatic limitations to what you're going to want to do here. All right, so here's the considerations. All fill situations, front fill, side fill, offstage, balcony, subwoofers are situational. They are situational. Rigging, sightline, physical space limitations all come into play here. Competing on-stage sources, even though we aren't going to really include that today, I have to include it here. Those are all going to impact it. Think about what it would be like to do immersive in a traditional theater, right? Where you might have, a front field immersive, maybe 5, 7 arrays across the front. Well, you might have an entire audience segment under the balcony that is completely blocked out of the PA. They would not see one element of the PA. So in that situation, would you do flat and mono there, or would you do spatialization under the balcony? There's all kinds of considerations to take in place there. Right? Do I need to support the main system format? Is flat and mono acceptable? These are all situational questions you're going to have to ask and answer, maybe on a daily basis if we were touring it. Certainly in an install, you would have to answer these questions pretty accurately. All right, we're doing good right at 10 o'clock here. All right, so let's move into object-based mixing now. Unless there's any questions there, I'll stop, take a pause for a drink, and any questions if anybody's got any.
Yeah, we had one question from Kim. Kim, if you want to unmute yourself and ask Robert your question.
Oh, sure. I was just going to clarify when we're talking about, and same thing with, LCR, the center, why can we get away without the array? Is it just because they're wider horizontally, so they're wider vertically as well? You say nimble, but what exactly are we talking about there?
Well, I'll ask you to clarify two things there. So when I say nimble vertically, meaning I can actually cover a large swath of vertical coverage without having to just keep extending the line to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Not for nothing. That's one of the reasons I think something like Anya or even the Martin PA is very, very well versed at doing this, because their ability to cover vertical is not dependent upon line length. That it was completely DSP driven there. Now, do you sacrifice amplitude? If I only put up 4 cabinets of Anya and I cover the entire vertical, of course, I'm going to sacrifice amplitude. But what I can say is everybody in that vertical swath is getting the same frequency response, mm-hmm. which is really, really important there, right? So, I mean, it becomes really nimble, meaning flexible in that situation, right? What was the first part of your question there where you were talking about LCR?
No, I was just clarifying. So when we're doing immersive, basically just breaking down, like, why can we tuck it all up away? What are the arrays doing for us as far as, vertical coverage that we can get away from when we're doing more speakers spread out?
let's see, how can I answer that here? I think we get away with it doing a higher trim height. Is that what you're getting at? Why can we get away with a higher trim height versus a lower trim height?
Basically, just why don't we have to cover in the same way that we do when we're doing stereo? Yeah. What's different about it?
I think it's partially because of the efficiency of the system, right? And also the localization aspect of it. We don't have that localization capability in stereo, really, for the most part, because that center image is created by the summation of two speakers, right? So if that is created by the summation of two speakers, as we take and move that up and start to bend that down, that becomes very, very difficult to do. Then we've added a whole nother geometric element to it there, whereas if it's coming from a single array, we don't have that issue. Right? If it's coming from a single array and we bend it down, great, no problem, right? That's what I want to say. That might require some more thought. I don't know if I've ever thought of it in that context, but it's certainly a good question.
I'll do some more research. Thank you very much.
Let us know what you find out, Kim.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll expect you next year presenting at the Live Sound Summit.
Yeah.
All right, let's move into this concept of object-oriented mixing and positioning and panning and all of this stuff, because this is the other, gosh, if you think immersive speaker deployments are disruptive to what we're doing, wait till you see what's happening at the console level. This is really going to disrupt what we've done in the past and have been learning for the last 30, 40 years, certainly disrupted a lot of things that I've been teaching, and it's very different mixing to an immersive field versus a stereo mix bus. I can just tell you right out of the gate. So let's take a look at this. So go here. Oops. So obviously in mono, we have a number of elements that are coming into a console, and they are being summed together electronically and sent out a single signal pathway to a PA system processor or crossover network, whatever, out to a single source, right? So everything here is dependent upon your management of gain structure and your management of that single bus, right? I've got to mix within a specific dynamic window to make that mix bus work. Otherwise, it's going to sound terrible. Everything is dependent upon that final hole in the funnel before it goes to the PA system, right? So there is a management that takes place there at the console of all inputs summed down to a mono output. Now, in terms of mixing, we kind of alluded to this earlier. We're going to have all elements exiting a single speaker system, right? So kick, snare, hat, rack, floor, it just goes right on down the line. All of that is leaving a single delivery system here. So it requires extremely competent management of frequency layering, volume, et cetera, to be able to make it where you can read all of these things. And as I mentioned earlier, you typically in a mono delivery system, whether it's, on an MP3 or whatever, or a PA system, the simpler the arrangement, the more easily you'll read all of these things. If you go to a church that's working on a mono PA system, and there are 6 acoustic guitarists on stage that are all playing the same chord shape, good luck hearing them all. You're just not going to do it. You're not going to pick them out. You're going to have to reorchestrate that a little bit in order to at least pick them out, and then let alone pick 3. That's the ones we're going to hear. So mono can be pretty challenging in that regard. Once we get to stereo, well, it's very similar to mono, except for we have a stereo bus now, right? Meaning we have a left and a right bus, but the same confines of being able to create something in a specific amplitude and dynamic window in order to exit the console properly still exist. We have a summation bus. Things are being summed together electronically before being delivered to the PA system. In this situation, we have 2 speaker systems that we're going to deliver to, and there is a center bus, right? And there is a center dB, or center down point in that stereo bus that deals with what happens when I have something pan center. And in most, I know in all DAWs, they'll give you the ability to adjust that center down point, meaning anywhere, like in this one, I think this is out of Pro Tools, anywhere from -2.5 to -6. And that is all meant to be able to make it where I can go from left all the way across right without it immediately jumping forward once it gets in the center. It's to make that transition from left to right very smooth and easy, right? So we have to deal with that. But the idea is that these center elements, right, are created from the summation of two signals. Again, and that happens acoustically, and it happens in the console as well. And this is all amplitude based. As we pan something left, it gets louder in the left speaker. As we pan something right, it gets louder in the right speaker. And then when it's pan center, it's equal energy in the center as it is to the left, right. So the idea is there to keep it smooth as we go left and right. But this is all amplitude based, right, as we go left and right. All right, so let's look at LCR now. And again, we're going to talk about divergence here a little bit, but here we have 3 buses leaving the console now, but we're still under the confines of electronic summing, still has to take place here and then be delivered out to these systems. So in this situation, we have a left, center, and a right discrete speaker systems. If we have a vocal, we're going to do 100% divergence here just for this initial discussion. If we have it pan center, it is only coming out of the center speaker, only coming out of the center speaker. We still have the ability to pan it left. If we want to pan it left, it will move right over there. If we want to pan it right, it'll move right over to the right as well. But in the center, when we have it pan center, it's only coming out of the center speakers, right? Now, if we go to 50% divergent, which is what I've been using on tour for many years, even though now it's funny, after all these years, I think I might handle this a little differently now that we've got immersive in play. In 50% divergent, as we have something pan center, it is equal energy in all 3 arrays, all right? That center array essentially becomes your phantom image in a speaker array, right? That's what it's becoming there, because you have the center elements. Anything that is pan center is equal energy in all 3 arrays. Now, so people have asked me this in the past. So why did you do this on tours? Didn't this make more problems than it solved? And the answer is no. And you've got to look at it again through the right lens, right? Through the lens of large scale concert sound. What did I achieve here? I achieved a center image that is created by 2 speakers, actually 3 speakers in this situation, where the offset is less than it was with 2 speakers. So it goes higher in frequency, right? As I'm out in these in-between positions between the left and the center, the offset between those 2 is much less than the offset between the left and the right. So the offset, the comb filter was much higher in frequency, not as low in frequency. It had less impact on the bottom end. So worked out really good. I used this for ages. Now, it took a lot of planning and a lot of care day to day in terms of alignments, et cetera, that you had to do. But it's still, I still stand behind it. It worked absolutely fantastic on the tours. All right. So in this situation is, even though it's 50% divergent, if I pan something left, it goes left. If I pan something at right, it goes right. But again, if it's in the center, it's in all 3 arrays. So, and on consoles, I know on Venue, you can do this. You can adjust this divergent percentage. You can make it 10% divergent all the way up to 100% divergent. So whatever is going to work for you in your given situation. All right. So we'll stop here, and we've got to ask and answer this question, because I think there's a lot of, maybe I'll call it confusion. Maybe there's confusion about it, but people have a tendency to wonder what this is. When you say object-based mixing, well, what is an object? Okay. Well, in this context, an object is any output from your console. It can be an object. Any output from your console can be an object. That means any post-fader direct output from any input channel can be an object. So I could have a fader that is an object. I can have a summing bus output from console, auxes, groups, matrices. Those outputs can be an object. They can be assigned as an object in a spatializer. You can even have a master bus, LR, an LCR, X.1 that can serve as an object in your spatializer. And you see this done a lot. I think it actually is going to be part of the solution in music mixing, but we even see this in film mixing, right? Where in Atmos, you could be 100% object-based, but if you see the amount of objects that are being used in a film, it would make your head spin. So a lot of times what they'll do in film is they'll create a 5.1 bed or a 7.1 bed or a 9.1 bed that contains the information for the majority of the movie, and then support it with objects, meaning bullet shots are going to be objects, Cars driving by are going to be objects, all those kinds of things. But the primary bus structure is 5.1 or 7.1, right? Fully divergent, by the way. All right. So we can do similar things like that in mixing music for immersive as well, where we might want to create an LCR bus or create a stereo bus and then support it with objects in the immersive. All of this, again, though, ties back to latency. We want to make sure that all of those objects are correct in terms of their output when they exit the console. All right. So any combination of the above could be used in your spatializer as objects. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So in this situation, you could have any number of inputs come into the console that are going to go directly back out of the console. In a fully discrete immersive mixing environment, you might have 128 inputs that go to 128 outputs to the spatializer. Well, we'll see that very shortly here with AVB. You can see close to that with MADI. Now I've seen some spatializers that can do 96 inputs via MADI. Dante, all of these, that's where networked audio is really, really going to get its legs, is in some of these immersive delivery systems, right? And the beautiful thing of this is the spatializer can take care of all your fold downs, right? So it's going to take care of the placement. Remember, in this situation, let's keep it fully discrete for now so I can say this and mean it. There is no mix bus, right? We're fully discrete here. Input goes directly to PA system. I push up the fader, it goes nowhere else. It goes directly to the spatializer and delivers it to the right position in the PA system. So there's no mix. I've been known to say this, and I still stand by it. The PA is the mix bus in this situation, right? If we're not using a hybrid bus structure. But the thing that comes with that is that the spatializer can do all the fold downs for us very elegantly. It can do a spatialized mono. It can do binaural. It can actually take the whole thing down to X.1. If we want to do mono fold downs on the console, we can do them. We want to do traditional stereo fold downs on the console, we can do them. Maybe it's for streaming, whatever we want to do. So you can have these hybrid workflows, right? Where I can be mixing immersive in the space, but yet still be mixing stereo to the stream, or mono to the stream, or mono to the dressing rooms, mono, whatever. I can be doing all those other deliveries while I'm doing spatialization with the PA system as well. All right, so let's take a look at object-based mixing then. What does it mean? Well, primarily what it means is that we're going to replace panning with positioning, right? That's the concept here. We're going to replace panning with positioning. You will not have a pan knob any longer. You'll have a position knob on the console, hopefully, and certainly somewhere in the spatializer where you could take and put this anywhere you want to put it. So that means that we could spatialize things, right? We can place objects anywhere that we want to place them in this immersive field. We could build the drum kit there if we wanted to do it. We could make it all come out of the center if we want to do it. Any place we want to place those objects, we can do it. And by default, once we extend the PA, if we extend around in coverage, well, those objects can go anywhere there at any time as well, right? Now, the thing we got to really pay attention to here, because you can get very fluffy and very romantic with this and get brought back down to earth very quickly in a large space. You have to be careful what you put out in the immersive surround field, right? Especially if we're talking about music here, right? Time does matter in music. If we're talking just effects, things like that, and by effects, I mean some flashy movement of something, it can kind of go anywhere if it's loose with regard to time. It's time element within the music. I'll give you a good example of this. When I was mixing Rush in the late 80s, early through the 90s, we were doing surround sound. We call it surround sound, but we had a PA system in each corner of the arena. We had the main left, right, in front of you. And then we had alternate 360-degree coverage PA clusters that were hanging in the back corners of the arena. And we could send anything around there anytime we wanted. And the thing we learned very quickly is that you had to be very careful what you put back there if it was rhythmic. Like you couldn't put anything really truly rhythmic that was depending upon groove and feel. Like you couldn't put drums back there. But what we could do, even things like an arpeggio, if you had a keyboard arpeggio that is in the time signature, time matters there. If you put it in the surround and let it stay stationary, it felt awful because of the time offset. It was, 100 milliseconds behind the music for some listeners. So it would feel terrible. But if you kept that arpeggio moving around the room, if you put it in a circle and just let it move, then all of a sudden it didn't feel so weird, right? So you just have to be careful with it with music. You have to be very cognizant of putting things out in the surround. And this is especially true if you have live performers on stage, right? Because they're going to hear that surround. The drummers on stage is going to hit the drum and hear it come 250 milliseconds later from the arena, so you got to be careful, got to be judicious with what you put out there. But having that said, that this can absolutely work, right? Even in an arena setting. So what are the other advantages to this object-based concept, right? Well, it's that we can place something anywhere in the space at any time, right? We're not confined to panning something left or panning something right. We can move it anywhere. And remember, objects don't just have to hang in a horizontal circle here. They can hang vertically in circles. They can be placed anywhere in the arena, and those objects can be positioned there. Think about what this might mean for corporate shows, or things like Anthony was talking about with Cirque, things like that. I mean, it's a huge, huge benefit to be able to do something like this so easily in the spatialization zone. The other thing that comes into play here, I kind of alluded to it earlier, is the concept of putting trackers on people and what that would mean in terms of intelligibility and localization. And I'll just reiterate this. And it's part of why I think this is I think this is the silver bullet for the church market, honestly, doing immersive, because it's the best combination of handling of music and spoken word. So if we had a spoken word, let's say that we had a person and we put a tracker on them, now no matter where they walk on stage, it sounds like it's coming from where they are standing, right? I think Martin probably does one of the better demonstrations of this. L Acoustics also does a very good demonstration of this as well. But go experience this, because if you've ever experienced just a stereo PA with somebody walking back and forth, and all of a sudden, there are times where I'm looking over here and I'm hearing him come from over here, it's completely disengaging. Our mind gets confused by it. Now, we've been used to it for 50 some odd years. We've kind of gotten used to it. But once you hear the opposite now, once you hear a tracked vocal that will move with that vocalist, it is just so completely engaging. It's not even funny. And, I've said it's the solution for the churches. I think it's the solution for rap music as well. Put the rappers on trackers. Ooh, that sounds like a good movie or something. Rappers on trackers. So, but put the rappers on trackers and you'll be able to tell who's rapping at any given time. I mean, the intelligibility of that would go through the roof compared to what it is today. So pretty exciting stuff there. All right. So that is that. Let's talk about, let's see, what have I got here? Oh yeah. So let's talk about doing a hybrid, right? Where I talked about doing an LCR bus plus objects. Right. That could work actually really good in this situation, I believe, because, and I would do this as 100% divergent here. So anything I have panned off of that LCR bus is actually going center, pan center is going center, and vice versa. Right. So that is all still in play. So the LCR bus is in play with 3 of the speaker systems, just as we would normally see it. Now you still have, you can still have situations here where you have offset, but that's okay. Remember, we talked about it. If it's 100% divergent, that's okay here. Anything I have pan center is center. And as I pan across, in the center of this pan, I'm going to have the offset issue, right? I'm going to have that propagation offset for the listeners that are standing right in between those 2 speakers. So in this situation, would I use it? Yes, I would, but I would be very judicious with it. I would, stick things out. I would typically lean things toward the left, toward the center, or toward the right. And if I was going to have other elements of that sitting in between those 2 speakers, then I do that with objects, right? Then I'm going to take objects and place them here. So that, it's a combination of things where you can get something happen very quickly. It's very easy to do things like parallel compression here, all kinds of things like that we could go in and spend another hour or 2 here easily talking about all the mix techniques that we use to make a stereo bus work, and how we might not have some of those at our disposal if we're doing, object-based mixing back to a spatial environment, right? So same thing would apply here, especially if we were doing surround, then the objects would be going out there. We would define some things as objects and some things as bus driven. And essentially this is how movies are being done today. They use a combination of 5.1, 7.1 supported by objects. There's no reason you couldn't do the same thing with music other than being very aware of the latency offsets in your console to ensure that all of these items, meaning the bus and the objects, are leaving the console at the same time. That would be one you want to take care of. And that might require some manual delay compensation at this point. I don't think the console manufacturers are quite ready to handle that yet. All right, so object-based mixing pluses and minuses. Any combination of individual or grouped objects are delivered to the spatializer, right? Panning is replaced by the concept of positioning unless you're doing a hybrid. And we also have the ability to create width of an object in a spatializer. You see this, the first place I ran into this was in the L-acoustic spatializer, where you can actually take an object and make it wider. You can actually expand it out. And really all that's doing is increasing its energy in a couple of different arrays. Like if you had something, spaced between two arrays, you could actually widen that a little bit and get it to have a little more weight and smoothing going on there. You also have the ability to create depth of an object. And when I say depth, I mean true depth of an object. There are reverb algorithms in spatialization that would give you this plane where you could actually push something farther back or bring it closer to you in the spatialization. That's also why I think it is just the answer for doing sound reinforcement for orchestra, for pops, even opera. I just think it would just be an unbelievable format for that. It would just solve so many problems and just be able to be done so well. You can implement a traditional LCR, mono stereo, X.1 as a bed. We talked about that just a little bit. So that's obviously a plus. One of the minuses that we run across in spatialized, and it's not readily apparent to guys initially, but it's one of those things that you have to kind of grow into. Is remember when we go back to that picture where we have 128 sources coming in and 128 sources going out. Well, what you sacrifice by doing that is you do not now have the ability to equalize that as a whole. Right? I can't equalize my music now because it's broken up into 128 parts. I also don't have the ability to compress it as a whole. Right. So again, that's where that hybrid busing might come into play a little bit to allow you to extend the life of some of these mix techniques that we've been using in order to try to get it to fit inside a stereo bus or a mono bus. So to me, that for my money, certainly for my mixing techniques, that's been one of the biggest challenges for me is honestly just as simple as not being able to equalize my music as a whole. Having to do it as individuals, that's challenging. I mean, that's really, really challenging. So, I think for some of the bus stuff I would be doing, there were certain elements of the music that I would probably do as bus and some as object. It's all to be determined. I mean, we're all still so fresh on this. I'm looking for my first big tour to go out and do it, and I'm really going to be able to dig in on it. I've been practicing here at home. Like I said, that's kind of the rebuild of the lab. I'm putting in a 9.1 kind of sound reinforcement system into that lab so that I can do some practicing with this and see how it's actually going to work. Even though it's in a small environment, hopefully I can get it to work out. Here is another kind of a good thing about it. We don't have to encode or decode to get spatialization to work in the PA system, right? Now, if we need to encode for surround formats that are going to go out on the stream or going to get broadcast, then of course you have to have an encode decode take place there. You're not going to have 128 elements show up at someone's house and have them, mix it together for you. So there's going to have to be some encode decode that takes place there. Certainly companies like Dolby, et cetera, are way, way ahead of the game on that in terms of being able to let that happen. Certainly a plus is that these spatializers are able to handle mono, binaural, X.1, all of these things really, really handily for us. So that's a big plus of the spatializers. And let's see what I got here. Traditional mono and stereo outputs. Yeah, we can do that right off the console if we need to do it. If our mix is coherent, we want it to be coherent there in terms of latency. And be very aware of latency differences between inputs, right, for the different speaker styles. So you got to be very aware of what you're doing at the console and at the speaker system. You've got to be able to manage propagation and latency separately. Put those into two different piles. Don't conflate them. Yeah, here's an interesting one. I've kind of found this with with the new ADC in Venue, you actually have to be aware of where the time alignment is automatically taking place in the console, because it may not support your objects, right? So a lot of times, I know ADC works like this in Pro Tools as well as in Venue. Some of that time alignment is actually taking place at the master bus. So you could have offsets of your objects and not realize it, right? So again, you're going to have to get your FFTs out, kids, and have a look at these throughputs and make sure they're right, because it's going to get really, really messy if you can't get these things coherent ahead of time. How about future developments? We'll finish with this. Boy, I'm right on the money here, time-wise. Future developments for Immersive here. Well, as I've been kind of alluding to over the past 5 minutes here, we're going to have some new grouping strategies for channel direct outputs, right? So like, for instance, maybe instead of grouping these in an actual audio subgroup, maybe what we want is a VCA that is only handling the direct outputs. Maybe we need to be able to assign direct outputs to a VCA to be able to handle those and not mess with our levels up into post-fader buses, right? So, console manufacturers might need to develop something along that lines. We're going to have to come up with some solutions for bus-driven processing. Parallel compression is the main one that everybody keeps breaking up, which we just kind of solved with the latest release of Venue. I won't put my Avid hat on too big here, but you can now parallel compress on every input and output independently on Venue. Now you can do it right at the channel level, whether it's an input or an output. So that helps solve some of that pain for parallel compression that people have responded really good to. This is absolutely a situation where virtual sound check will be a necessity, right? Where you can virtual sound check into a virtual space. What you're going to need to do in terms of setup and to get ready, even in a standalone software where you might be able to take tracks and recreate something spatially via binaural listening or whatever, that's all going to come into play here. We're all going to need to be able to do that sort of thing. To be able to set up these things. It's another part of the reason I'm doing 9.1 down in the lab, so that I can do show prep there in a real sense, as opposed to having to rely on binaural. I kind of touched really lightly on this, but it's a real challenge, is how do we move from immersive console setup to stereo if we have to change speaker formats mid-tour for a given show? That's going to be really, really tough to deal with in the initial days, let alone, none of the spatialization information translates between spatializers. So if one day I'm on D&B PA and the next day I'm on L acoustics, well, guess what? None of that spatialization information is going to translate across. You'll have to redo all of the spatialization aspect of it on a day-to-day basis. So those are considerable hurdles that I would encourage you to take very seriously. Here's a good one that people haven't really thought about much, but if we're doing full surround immersive for a concert, right? How do we rectify where the objects were placed during the performance for the post engineer, right? How does he know where they were in being presented in the acoustic space, in the electroacoustic space, I should say? He's not going to know, and he won't know until we get some metadata attached to that object. So hopefully the spatializer would be able to provide that metadata, and hopefully at some point we would be able to record that metadata with the track and give it to someone in post so they could have an accurate placement of that spatialization. Yeah. So here's another one. This has been a really, really interesting conversation that's come into play. I've met with the guys at Netflix who are doing a lot of spatialization and just talking about the best ways to do this. And I don't know that we totally got the answer now, but where do you put audience mics for a full surround immersive spatialization that's going to go to post? You're not just going to put up a left, right. How are you going to do this and create spatialization of that audience as well in post? We're going to have to save that one for a lab. I think I might have actually covered this in the lab a little bit, but put that in your brain and start thinking about it a little bit, and think about all the arrival times that could be coming into that microphone from the PA system versus the arrival times of audience members into those mics, and how you're going to rectify that in post, right? Very challenging indeed. Right, and show file management. How do I move from one console to another if I need to do it? If I've set up big object stuff, so it could end object setups. This could be a very, very laborious task, to be sure. All right, 10:34, 4 minutes over. I'm gonna hold Anthony Morano responsible there. He's the one that made me late.
That was a great presentation. Thanks, Robert. And of course, like you said and discussed, the floor is open for questions. I have one here from Michael, and I don't think he's with us anymore, so I'm just going to read it. How does immersive change the conversation with the video world? A lot of what you're mentioning is talking about the audience member looking at the stage in real life. So how does the tour video setup alter the audience experience of the immersive setup? So what we are seeing on the screen, how does that correlate with the immersive sound?
Yeah, I mean, we're challenged with that anyway in live sound, because video, especially IMAG video, right, is always going to be out of sync. And it's not the fault of video. Video travels at the speed of light. It's audio that's out of sync with the video, depending on where you are in the room. You're never going to get it aligned, other than really a very small segment of the audience is going to experience IMAG in sync with the audio. So, I would hate to just kind of throw up my hands and go, I don't know if we have a solution for that. I don't know that spatialization is going to impact it any more positively or negatively than traditional speaker formats. I think it's going to be a similar thing. But I think what it might do, I think what spatialization stands to do, and this might sound a little fluffy, but I'm going to stand behind it, is it might actually start drawing eyes back to the stage instead of looking at the video screen, right? Where is it like if my ear is drawn there and I look there and I see the guitar player, maybe I'm going to look there and watch him play the solo, as opposed to, watching him on the screen and hearing it come from over there, that kind of thing. So, again, it's all to be determined, I think, by getting a lot of experience out in the field with it. But I don't think it's going to be any worse than it is right now. That's for sure.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Chris
go ahead.
Had his question hand up for a long time, and then he put it down. I would hate for him to not get a chance to talk.
Who is this?
Christoph.
Yes.
So Christoph, if you still want to talk, go for it.
Yeah, hello. Sorry, I'm at home with my young son, so just shortly. I want to ask about the crosstalk, especially on the mics when you do the orchestra, because this is a tricky part, because there's a blur everywhere. It's not just an object. When we have an object, we could record it as an object, but when we have a real orchestra, then we have lots of crosstalk, and this can be tricky. What do you think, Robert?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think about how I might do this if I'm ever tasked with doing it. I think I would still zone mic. If it's although, we've been in socially distanced orchestra, which has been very challenging to do, I might add. But if we get back to regular distancing on an orchestra, I think your crosstalk situation actually becomes more prevalent, right? Because now we got, microphones close in on zones and they're picking up other elements as well. But usually, at least my take on it, if I was going to spatialize and do sound reinforcement for an orchestra, I'm really trying to recreate that spatial element on stage in the PA system. Like I want the PA system to be nearly invisible acoustically to what people are hearing. And the way you're going to be able to do that so beautifully in spatialization with objects is you're going to take those zones, right, and treat them as objects and place them in the same visual space that the orchestra is currently seated. This is what I would do anyway. And that way, I don't think the crosstalk is really going to be any more of an issue than it would normally be, right? It's just, the spatialized PA system just becomes a much bigger version of the orchestra. And the beautiful part about it with spatialization is I can take those elements and push them back in time acoustically to the stage, right? I can get the electroacoustical to be very close in time with the actual acoustical instruments on stage, which will help make the PA more invisible for sure. So, if I'm excited about doing it for rock and roll, I'm really excited about trying to do it for orchestra. I think it's totally a game changer for the orchestra world.
Thank you, Robert. I've done it a few times with the orchestra. That's why I'm asking, because it also depends on a venue. I had one show analyzer acoustics with a small venue, and I get the close miking and the zone miking, and I had to sacrifice something to get something. So it's a tricky. But
are you saying that audio has trade-offs? Are you suggesting there's trade-offs in audio? I might agree with you there. Yes. I got to ask you though, since you've done it a couple of times, do you feel that it was successful? Was it worth the effort?
Yeah, it was successful finally. But from my experience, when I did another gig on a bigger venue, then it's much more better and much easier.
Yeah. Nice. Well, yeah, I would tend to believe that. Like I'll reveal some to you. And I've seen a couple of designs lately of outdoor places that kind of are mimicking the Hollywood Bowl, right? New place down south, Southern California that put up, and it's almost like they cookie cuttered the Hollywood Bowl and just put up the left, right. They didn't even put up the center, which you can kind of see there. They did a little mini center like the bowl has got. And I just remember thinking, wow, if you're doing orchestra here, man, why isn't anybody going to do a big immersive front field there for that orchestra? That just feels like that is such a perfect fit for that environment. I mean, I'm sure it's a matter of trade-offs again. It's like, well, we're going to have rock and roll come in. We got to have a big stereo PA system. I can see it there. But boy, I would sure love to see some of those orchestra shells do immersive across the front. I bet it would be fantastic.
Okay, thanks. I see that Pooch is here with us, and he raised his hand. So
this is trouble.
Here comes trouble.
This is trouble. Here we go.
Hi, Robert.
Hi, Ken.
Amazing, dude. Thank you for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Good. Thank
you. I've had an opportunity to mix a little bit of the space map stuff, and I haven't mixed much on other things. But I think it's a technology that is amazing. It's not right for everything. Is Iron Maiden going to be mixed on immersive? Not a chance.
Probably not.
Right?
Yeah.
They're not interested in doing anything like that. So it has its place. So I hope that people don't just say, well, this is where audio is going. Immersive is the way,
Yeah, I kind of said that at the top. This is not a binary conversation. This is not an either or, right?
Yeah.
We need them both.
I totally agree. Totally agree. But
Mark Carolyn went through the same thing. He evaluated it for Muse and went back to stereo for Muse. He was like, no, we need that big kind of impulsive, thing that happens here. He says it kind of gets a little disjointed in immersive, right? So my
experience was the loss of impact, just what you said. It's cool, it spreads everything out, and it's like, wow, I feel like I'm immersed, but there's not that in your face, PA kind of feeling. But I think truly the real thing as mixers that's going to be hard about this is that we live and die by our board mixes, right? Like we hand stuff to artists, and they are not going to be able to understand the down mix of this. So now I'm having to make two different versions of a mix coming out of my thing, the thing that the audience is hearing, but also keep a whole other thing going on for a left and a right that I'm handing to, the video guys and everything else. It's not as simple as it all broken up, then just down formatted into left and right, like what TV guys do with 5.1. It's not like that at all. And so I think that's going to be our battle, right?
Yeah. Well, it's certainly a logistical battle. For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think as the technology develops a little bit and as binaural develops a little bit, you'll be able to give some sense of what's happening spatialization-wise to a listener in ears. I know L Acoustic is driving really hard toward that right now to be able to provide that that way, if for no other reason than to make it as the pitch to an artist to be able to say, okay, this is what it's going to sound like in this seat. This is what it's going to sound like in this seat, and have that be an immersive experience when they're listening to it with virtual sound check, being going to go, okay, let's mix it and see what it's going to feel like. So I think that will come over time, and similar sorts of things. I think is similar encoding and decoding will happen over time, where even on our phone, we could listen to it in some sort of decoded surround format. So more work on us for sure to be able to do it. We got nothing else to do. Let's just go ahead and mix 2 or 3 formats for the thing.
The thing for me that was hard is it's 2 different ways of mixing, right? It's like, you've talked about this in your talk, but, we have this thought process of combining things and using bus to bus compression in order to create a left and right cohesive thing. Now you take that away from me. It's totally different than I think even a binaural down mix is. Do you know what I mean? So
in terms of those are two different conversations.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I don't know. It's an interesting thing. I just think that I hope that it's not give the gun to the baby, and the artist and the management.
What country are you living in? What country do you live in right now?
No, I just mean that the artists and the management aren't like, forcing it upon us for what as a sound professional. Like, this is maybe not a great idea to go down.
Again, I'll just kind of look out on the horizon a little bit, and kind of where we have some experiential information that tells us this kind of thing could happen, where I think as Dolby Atmos makes its foray into the studio and more records are made in Atmos and more artists start to write and compose with Atmos in mind, it will make its way to us. Without question, it will make its way to us, where it's like, that's going to get done in Immersive. Is that going to be AC/DC? No. Is that going to be Iron Maiden? No. But there are certainly styles of music out there that are going to get created and mixed specifically with that format in mind. And now we're going to have an answer for it. So that part of it is exciting to me. I like that part of it.
I think it's exciting, but I think it's also, what you just described is funny. I've had a bunch of conversations with studio guys, friends of mine that are studio engineers, and they are being forced into this Atmos thing. And there's a few of them that are like, this sucks, man. Like, what? I don't want to use this. And so it's
same
an
thing happened between mono and stereo. Some of us are old enough to remember that. Get the
I know.
There was a lot of resistance to stereo when it first came out.
I get it. But they're talking about past recordings that were then transferred into Atmos now.
Oh no! Now we're going down a different lane.
I know, it's a whole other path. But
don't repaint the Mona Lisa for me, please. I don't need pastels in the Mona Lisa. Thank you.
Anyway, all right. Thanks, Robert. It was a great talk. Appreciate you.
Thanks for the comments, man. Appreciate it. Always great catching up with you.
Yeah, man.
Hey, thanks. And I have two more raised hands. First one from Nathan. Nathan, go ahead.
Hello. Hi, Robert.
Nathan, how are you, man? Good to see you.
Hey, I'm good. Hey, what's funny is that I saw that same Bon Iver tour, and I think a lot of people did before it. Unfortunately, parts of it were canceled due to some unfortunate events. Anyway, not to focus on that. It was super cool, and I got to be with Scott Sugden while he sort of explained, like, look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this, and I'm like, stars in my eyes, like, whoa, yeah, gimme. At the same time, I'm really like fighting it because I'm like, I'm never going to work on a show like this. I'm never going to work on a tour like this. But then there was a moment during your presentation where you say, hey, I had this conversation with them, and they started to say, hey, maybe so. And I was like, whoa, that's really cool. Like, I don't know if I would ever be in that position, but that's sort of the challenge in my mind. And I feel like Kim maybe was reacting in the same way. And I feel like Kim and I are going to give Nick some tough questions tomorrow during his DMV presentation on the same topic, because I think the way that engineering people of us see it is that we have a hard enough time just getting the whole audience covered with one amount of information. Okay, now we got to go to stereos. Now we got to get the whole audience covered, and now all this information. So we see the complexity really ramping up, and we see our inability to sort of like deal with that a little bit. And so when you started saying, well, I said this is how it could work, and I started wondering, are there is there this balance and these trade-offs everywhere with this system where I'm thinking, okay, everything is 5 times the complexity, 5 times the cost. It's never going to be in my life. But maybe that's not true. Maybe there are some trade-offs and balances where you've been in these conversations where you say, yes, we have more speaker arrays, but the trim height is a little bit different. Is it similar with other aspects like cost, total like power and things like that?
Yeah. Well, again, it's trade-offs, and even the L Acoustics is doing it this way, where it's not necessarily 5 K1 arrays hanging across there. you have to judge what the presentation is going to be, and then address it accordingly. And I've seen the spreadsheets, and it's like, well, that actually comes out about the same cost. That's really not that much more expensive. More expensive in terms of labor, yes. More expensive in terms of points, yes, of course it is. But in terms of pure dollars, all of a sudden it wasn't all that dramatic, And you start thinking, well, if I get this versus that many more dollars, yeah, I could make that pitch to the management, et cetera. But I'll looking at it in a complete umbrella, meaning PA system and mixer, all as one system here. I will say this to you. I would submit this to you, that there is a level of simplicity now that comes with it that is not there in stereo. I mean, you think about how complex we have made the signal flow now to be able to try to make stereo work and compete with recordings, right? I mean, Ken kind of alluded to it. We got all this bus to bus, compression, all these kind of things. Now go into a church environment where they're trying to do the same thing and working with inexperienced mixers, people that are just there to kind of manage the event. There is no way they can handle that. No way. And Immersive is a solution there, because especially if you do it fully discrete, they don't have to, the concept of busing doesn't come into their mind. I push up the fader, I hear the fader. I position it. Oh, they're over on the side of the stage. Okay, I'm going to move them over there for now. It becomes just dead simple. I mean, in terms of just getting levels, and the intelligibility of it is so much easier than trying to create that kind of intelligibility out of a mono bus or a stereo bus. There's an ease to it that has not been there before.
That's really interesting. It's not just like a big ramp up multiplication. It's like a reordering of complexity.
It is totally a reordering of the complexity. That's a fantastic way of putting it. I'm stealing that.
Yeah, you can use that. Cool.
That'll be in my next presentation next year. Reordering complexity.
Thanks, Nathan. Vladimir, you have your hand raised, so go ahead and ask your question.
Hello, Robert.
Hello, Vladimir. How are you?
I'm good. Good to see you here. My question will be a bit like advice that I'm looking for.
Okay.
I was following your lab discussion about the immersive and your lecture here. The advice or maybe some I think it's an advice that I'm looking for. I'm the way that I'm mixing, it's obviously stereo left and right because of the positioning of the speakers. The thing is that I'm having a band group and a vocal group. Mm-hmm. And I'm using matrices to send it to the speakers. The thing that I somehow have an issue with, and in the moment when I use and set up my matrices to be in a stereo setup, to leave the console as a stereo pair, I had somehow a problem with the music sounds somehow dull and squashed, and instead of have a space and stuff like this. In the moment when I use a mono matrix and I send, of course, I have a stereo groups for the band and stereo groups for the vocals, and I send it accordingly to the left and to the right. The left is going to one matrix and the right is going to the other mono matrix. Suddenly the mix, it's opened, and I was looking through manuals, but I don't understand if I'm the mistake, if I'm doing something wrong, or the manufacturer is made the console in this way or something like this.
Right.
I'm using a Yamaha console.
Well, obviously, without being in front of your console, going to be a little difficult to advise you on it. But I'll give you these things to try if you can try this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let me just clarify a couple of things or make sure of a couple of things. So you have a matrix-driven PA system?
Yes.
Normally, meaning I have a matrix going up maybe for a main array, another matrix for a side array, et cetera,
yes.
Things like that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So then it has to travel via matrices to get to those positions.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so is there anything in between the matrix and the PA system? Is what kind of processing is happening there? Is it
the processing is the outputs leaving the console, going in the amplifiers, and that's
So
it. The processing is inside the amplifiers.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. I just needed to make sure there was no
Yeah,
devices
absolutely.
there.
Yes.
So the only thing I think I need you to make sure of here is make sure that I mean, I guess the easiest way to do this would be to send something, take an input that is traveling this signal path and pan it to one side and make sure it is only coming out the left side of the matrix, only coming out, where it's supposed to come out. If I pan it and it comes out of both sides of the PA, that means it's being summed together somewhere in the signal chain.
Right? I tried it I tried exactly this, but I cannot localize it correctly that it sounds like it's coming from both, but it's panned to one side. And
inkling, that's kind of what I suspected was going to happen. So my inkling is to say that probably in the matrix, the sources are not split up there. They're not panned to their positions. It's either taking your left and right bus and summing it back to mono there, or it's not. Because remember, that source is going to come into the matrix and probably have a pan application applied to it, or a width at the very least, right? So
but if the matrix is set up to be stereo, then you can use the panning. But if the matrix is mono, let's say I have a mono matrix go to left and a mono matrix go to right, and then the stereo group, the left of the group is set to the left, the first matrix, and the right go to the.
But if you do that as dual monos, I don't think you're going to be able to experience any panning there, are you?
Okay, I mean this is something that I'm asking where's the mistake that I'm making?
In that situation, I mean, I would recommend, and if it's not working correctly here, then you almost have to approach the manufacturer and say, why is this happening? Okay, where you take a stereo bus from your console and it's going to go directly up into a stereo matrix.
Yes,
and you need to make sure that is panned out left and right in the matrix.
But it's somehow it's not, there is no option to be like this.
Yeah.
There in the, I tried it because in the last versions of Yamaha consoles, you have the option to put the panning in the matrix, but in this one I couldn't find it. That's why I'm really confused about everything.
That's honestly, that's what's got to happen there for you to be able to continue with the stereo concept up to the
have
PA system.
make the localization to go in left and right. Yes,
I have to believe that the console has the capability to do that. If they're offering a stereo matrix, then there has to be a way to take a stereo source into that matrix and keep it stereo.
Okay. I will keep digging.
My advice to you, which is worth every penny that you're paying for me right now, is to dig in with the manufacturer or the manual and make sure that that's going right. You should be able to take a single input and sweep it left to right if it's traveling all the way through that matrix to your PA system and experience that left to right travel. If you can't, or if you're experiencing a narrowing of that, that's got to be happening somewhere, either in the console or in the amplifier distribution there.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'm sorry I don't have a better answer, but keep trying.
I just wanted to ask her, a professional with a lot of experience. Thank you very much.
Good luck to you.
Time. Thank you.
Thanks, Vladimir. We have Lou with his hand raised in the air. Lou, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Robert.
Hi, Lou.
So I'm curious in the future what consoles will start to look like if this kind of spatialization thing is kind of integrated and more popular and starts to get into the mainstream. Will we see less physical controls and more just like object-based mixing overall?
You could. I mean, I still, and it's probably a function of the gray hair on my head. You know, I'm still a fan of tactile, especially for live sound, because I mean, I look at live sound this way. It's a heads up workflow, meaning I got to be looking up and watching what's going on and reaching down and working. And that's very difficult to do in a touch environment, in my opinion. That it almost invariably forces people to look down while they're, you know, in what is a heads up workflow. So that's probably my biggest knock against it. If there's a tactile element to it as well, yeah. In terms of what consoles will look like, I think their setup could certainly become more touch centric, without a doubt. But the actual operation of it, the mixing operation of it, I still think needs to have a tactile element to it, at the very least of which is faders. You know.
That
Does that answer your question? Does that go deep enough for you there?
Yeah, I was picturing just faders, but less individual channel control. That would be more touch-based, so you have a tactile way to drive, but also a lot more object-based, so you can move things and change them as you need.
In terms of positioning, yeah, I could see all kinds of things happening. I mean, I envision a world someday where we're actually going to have a heads-up display that is the console. It's not sitting in front of us. I mean, you laugh about it, but you know, virtual reality could be a reality there. You know? Where, you know, I'm you know, I put on the goggles. I still have my audio senses to me, but you know, now I'm inside the console. I could certainly see that happening.
Cool, Lou. Thanks for your question. We have one from Tim, who's unable to come to the mic, so I'll ask it for him. How is standardization happening around immersive sound? Like today's consoles and processors can all do mono, left, right, LCR, but immersive is currently an external thing. So how easy would it be to get localization information moved between consoles, for example?
Well, I mean, I can speak fluently about the venue environment right now, but you know, we currently have plugins that work as operational control for the spatializer, meaning on the channel strip, you don't have if you're controlling the spatializer and you're in object base, you pull up the plugin and you have control over positioning, not panning, and a lot of the other parameters on a per channel basis, right? I think Digico is doing it with, I'm spacing the acronym. Oh my gosh, that's terrible.
Linked objects, is that it?
No, it's it'll come to me. It'll come to my brain here in a second. But it's just another control protocol that comes off the console, and they can control the spatializer from the desk. So will we see more and more? Will we see more spatialization move into the desk? I don't think we'll see that for quite a time. I mean, because there's a lot of a lot of hardware, a lot of DSP programming that would go with that. I mean, to me, it almost becomes the same argument that we made in the early days of digital consoles: was should the crossover live in the console? And I was like, no, I don't think it should. You know, I think that should still be part of a function of the speaker system. I don't think I would want that to travel with the console, as if I change the console, now I don't have a crossover for the speaker system. So, you know, I think it's a similar argument there where spatialization can stay outside of it. What will certainly take off over time is the way we transport audio to the spatializer, and then the integration of control back to the console. Because at some point, you want the guy mixing at the console being in control of the spatialization elements of it. You don't have to go to a separate device or a separate screen, things like that. So I envision it being remote control without spatialization built into the desk.
Yeah, thank you. If anybody else has a question, please unmute yourself and ask the question, or put it in the Q&A slides that we have. While we're waiting for somebody else to do that, I have sort of a question myself. I've been working on, excuse me, I'm working on a show coming from the monitor engineer side of things, with immersive audio and Digico working with Clang for their 3D mixing, and the way they have set up their sort of spatial control on their desks.
Yeah.
And what I have found, although this is sort of more touch controls, more knobs and switches to turn around, is that when we are using 3D immersive in-ear mixes, there's less EQ and dynamic processing that we have to do as engineers. Do you agree with that assumption also for live sound, or is that something that is yet to be determined?
You're touching on exactly what I was kind of saying about that HOW experience, and the little bit of immersive that I've done, that has been the experience. Full stop. Is that all of a sudden it was like, well, wait a minute now. I don't have to dynamically put the brakes on that thing in order to get it to sit in the mix anymore. And certainly equalization wise, I don't struggle to hear things in terms of intelligibility, et cetera, like be able to pick something out of a mix. That struggle is, I don't want to say gone, but it's almost gone. I mean, you're moving a fader up, you're hearing it come from somewhere, so I think we, as audio guys, we always tend to fall into this trap, and where we kind of take what we've known and what we've done in the past and try to force it on the new thing. It's like, well, how about we just operate the new thing like it's supposed to be operated and see how it goes, as opposed to taking everything we've learned for 20 or 30 years and trying to force it onto that topology. That rarely goes good, so does it change how we do things? The Clang environment is a great example of it. Clang environment is actually a good example of where doing touch and object base for the artist is really powerful. Like for the engineer, I don't think it's near as powerful as it is for the artist to be able to look at a screen and go, this is what I want my headphone mix to sound like in terms of placement. Yeah, put that here, put this back here, over that kind of thing. It's fantastic for that. That's where tactile is a problem for them. They don't want a lot of knobs and faders sitting in front of them typically, especially on a stage. But to be able to let them do that in a spatial environment and an object environment, touch environment, sure, all day long, it would do that, sure.
Great. So I don't see any more questions coming in on my end.
You put in the acronym OSC. That's what I was trying to think of. Thank you.
Yeah. There we go.
Thank you. My goodness.
So if you have sort of final remarks on your presentation.
Well, I think it would probably just be, stay open-minded to it, guys. Try not to think binary. It's like, and that can even go for your workflow, right? Don't think binary in terms of this is the only way I work, so I have to make immersive work that way as well. Open your mind a little bit and be open to some different changes here, because I think it's here to stay. I'll just say it. I'm not kidding. I mean, I can't wait to get out and mix on it and do some stuff with it. I think it's just going to be sensational. I can't wait to get out and test the boundaries of it. I want to get out and do a stadium with it. Give me 7 cranes, hang me 7 big lines. I want to give me a big front field. Come on, let's do it. We got the money. Come on, let's do it.
Hey, let me interrupt here for a second because Pete Shirley sent me a direct message with a question. And
where is he at? Is he on Mars or something?
I don't know. A direct message, and I'm not sure if you'll understand it, but I'm going to give it a shot. So Robert indicated early in the presentation that time alignments for inputs and bus outputs should not be accomplished within the console.
No, it should be.
Right. I thought that maybe just got that wrong. So
yeah, I misstated it, but no, you want to ensure it. It's same principle that I've been preaching and teaching for ages now, is that let's get all the outputs of the console, all the inputs. Let me rephrase it. Let me get all the inputs of the console exiting the console at the same time, regardless of whether it's stereo mixing or immersive mixing. Let's start there and then let propagation do its business out in space.
Great. Thank you.
I hope that answered his question.
Cool. And just the final one for me, because I just thought of it. I hope you don't mind stretching your time just a few minutes longer.
Not at all.
With DSP processing at yet another level, so with this sort of immersive processing that's happening, we are adding latency into the signal path.
We are indeed.
So what happens in sort of smaller venues where this sort of time issue is already at a critical point and you can't get away with that? Is that something that we have to sort of keep in mind as well?
Yeah, you do, without question. And the place where I've seen it fall down, believe it or not, is spoken word in a small place where people are, using a spatializer and a tracker on something, and it's a small enough place. The person's you might hear the person speaking before it comes out of the PA system, and that is a real problem. Now it's a bad trade-off, right? I mean, you got all this control and everything over it, but now it's a bad execution. So yeah, spatialization, DSP, additional throughput, is a real issue, and it's one you have to keep your eyes on. I think luckily, the throughputs for the spatializers that are, like L Acoustics and the DMB one, they're pretty low. So, you're going to get away with a lot there. They're actually doing a lot of number crunching there and getting it through the unit pretty quickly. But if you go to computer-based spatialization, and not necessarily to single them out and say that they're bad here, but it's just a real issue. It's almost the difference between native plugins and DSP plugins. If you're doing spatialization in a computer and then hooking up IO to it to deliver it, to take it in and deliver it out, that's going to be the most latent environment that you can come up with. Right now, all the spatialization processing is taking place by the computer, which we all know computers are not good in terms of latency, in terms of throughput. You're going to have to pay really, really close attention to buffer sizes for the software and keep the latency low. I mean, you might see something, from a computer, you might see something 20, 40, 60 milliseconds, right? Which would be unusable in any situation where there's a live source. Now, if there are no live sources in the program material, maybe it's all EDM, whatever, big deal. Who cares, right? But if there are acoustic sources that are going to come out of come off the stage and be added with the PA, now throughput latency on your processor is a real issue. You got to pay attention to it, right?
Thanks for that. And thanks for the presentation. It's always stuff that we need to sort of think about and mull over in the next few days.
It should keep you awake at night. That's for sure. It has me a few nights. That's for sure.
Well, there's just a lot of love in the chat for your presentation and for you taking the time. If you have a few minutes, you can stick around and maybe talk to some people if they still have some questions.
Yeah, I'm glad to do it. I'm actually going to stay logged in all day here today. So you might see me crimping in the background or something. So or doing some soldering in the background, but I'm going to stay logged in all day. I want to hear the rest of the presentations. I missed some of them yesterday. I got off on some family business yesterday, but can't wait to hear the rest of it today.
Cool.
All right, thank you, guys.
Just on a side note, Ken Pooch already mentioned this yesterday about the importance of mental health. I just wanted to sort of add a personal note. The Back Lounge project that you have sort of started, if you guys don't know it, it's basically people from the business coming together under Robert's wing and just talking about the business and the industry.
I love that you referred to it as a party. That's so good.
That's something that sort of keeps our sanity in check. I've been a member a couple of times just because of the time difference for me. Sleep is sometimes also of great value for mental health. Yes. Just to throw that out, thank you for everything that you're doing for the community and for Live Sound Summit, because we always are glad to host you back.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, guys. Thank you for inviting me always. I'm glad to help out anytime you need me. So pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Appreciate
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Anthony. Yep.